Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month is PTSD Awareness Month, and we're really focusing on the idea of the silent pain. Just to give a little bit of context, PTSD Awareness Month, really started. It first appeared in the 1980s. It was in the DSM-V as a mental disorder, but earlier publications really focused on the war neurosis, the shell shock, the soldier's heart. As time went on, and especially during the time of the Iraq War in 2007, we had a National Guard service member who had died by suicide. And on 2010, June 27th, PTSD Awareness Day was established, and now in 2014, it became a federal month to recognize PTSD. I also want to kind of side note. Also, when I'm recording this is actually Juneteenth, today is June 19th. It's good to remember that how long it took while people were still thinking about slavery. It seems so far away, but it's not that far away really, and it reminds us just how long it took for people to realize they were not enslaved. These are just some of the things that I wanted to recognize as we remember also not only PTSD as we're going to focus the conversation on, but also those who were affected. Obviously, think about Juneteenth and what that represents. Today, we have a new guest. His name is Brad. I'm going to ask you how to pronounce your last name. So how do you say your last name?
It's Mewhort.
Mewhort.
Yes.
I'm going to call you Brad. It's fine. I don't want to mess up people's last names. A lot of people used to call me Colin, but there's actually a little accent. So I understand the pain when people don't really understand the last name. But I really appreciate you coming on, Brad. Before we begin, I want to just give a disclaimer, especially those in the States, but those around the world. Working in the field, I always don't like reinventing the wheel, but if you are in crisis, please seek, professional help immediately. 9AA is a suicide crisis lifeline. Like I said, I don't like reinvent the wheel, whether that's a church setting, whether it's just a club, maybe it's just some of the friends that that you hang out with. If you're not doing well, the hardest thing as an adult to say is, I need help. So saying those three words together can be really impactful around these dark times, when you are feeling that way. I'm going to start off with actually Chinese proverb. It's kind of interesting. It says, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. When we think about PTSD, and also from your context, Brad, what would you want? What comes to mind when you hear this quote or this proverb, or what comes to mind when you think about this, or anything else you want to add?
Thanks, Robert. Say first of all, appreciate you having me here. It's good to be here, and I love how you brought in the fact that today is Juneteenth in the context of PTSD Awareness Month. Two totally separate things, and at the same time, inevitably, from the history that's led us to having a Juneteenth, there must be unfathomable PTSD in so many people. So really appreciate your opening there. And then getting to this Chinese proverb, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. What I hear in that is we always have choice. And that even in moments when we are in some kind of darkness, metaphorical darkness, where it seems like we might not have much choice, be really stuck, that there's always something. We can always make some choice that makes things even just a little bit better.
Yeah. I when you were mentioning that, I was thinking, choice, I always say plural, but I always try to make sure, because a lot of times we think dualistically, it's either or, right? But there's sometimes a third option we're not even considering, so I would like to expand it besides the two options, because usually we are either it's going to work out or it's all going to fall apart, or something else, So those are the kind of things when I think about this quote is, we can a lot of times I have people in my office, and understandably they're going through so much, but sometimes we get stuck on this either or we get stuck on maybe negative habits or whatnot. I would say when they have a lot of really understandable reasons why they're struggling, but simple thing that I mentioned is it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. So so we kind of have to start from somewhere. So I do like, so they're cursing the darkness per se. They're cursing what's going on with them. But let's try to find a way to kind of address this together. Obviously, the person being heavily a part of this, because it won't work without them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you, there's so much to talk about when it comes to PTSD. It's so there's different avenues. Obviously, it's heavily focused on the military, which I served in I joke, but Air Force. My brother and my father were in the Army, so it's they always every branch makes fun of each other. So it's like I'm the chair force per se, as they would say. But at the same time, I do recognize the extreme cases, the ones who went over and saw combat, those who came back, or those who did not. So PTSD is definitely prevalent in that community, but they're also prevalent in other communities that are not really always recognized. A lot of times there's a lot of shame involved of just saying I am experiencing trauma. Anything you want to comment? Anything that comes to mind when you think about this? When we talk about the grouping, it's very obvious. A lot of people say, "Oh, PTSD, that's soldier's heart. Those are shell shock." What comes to mind when you think about these groupings? And anything you want to add for what we spoke of?
Yeah, I think trauma just is far more universal than the military, and certainly not to minimize the military or just say it's universal, because certainly it's those who have been in combat have potentially severe PTSD that's going to go far beyond what very many people have. So respect and appreciation for the people who have served in that way and sacrificed a great deal. And at the same time, there are a lot of people who encounter other violence in other ways, in other places. And actually, I can give a very personal example of that. I mean, if you look at me, I would check almost every box going down the list of what would be considered privileged. And I grew up in a middle class neighborhood, which you would think was safe, and yet I experienced quite extraordinary first bullying when I was in my early adolescence, which actually led me to come to believe that violence was the only way that I could be safe in the world, leading me to actually have quite a few encounters with violence through my life. And just if you look at me on paper, few people would guess how much violence I was actually involved with and exposed to in my adolescence and even into my early adulthood. And I don't think that I'm uncommon. I mean, perhaps uncommon in that, I really came to recognize how much I'd been exposed to violence and how much it was affecting my life. And now that I've written a book about it and I'm talking about it. But I think that exposure to violence and trauma is really a lot more widespread than people even realize. I think a lot of people I think violence in some sense is so normalized and even glorified in our culture that people just see it as normal and don't even put together that some of their struggles, their challenges are actually coming from trauma.
Yeah. We're talking about trauma, and this month is, obviously to spread awareness, but also support. Support is important when remembering those struggling with PTSD and their families. But how we support those struggling can be as important. It's interesting. I can't do everything. If someone, as I can imagine, if you're a parent and you want to, the hardest thing as a parent, at least, is to have your kids struggle and you can't help them. With PTSD, it's a lot of it takes the time it takes. We have this boxed in world where it has to be enoughness. We have to be I'm only valuable if I'm busy. A bit more busy I am, the more value is. And I'll be honest, I could get caught up in the busyness. I could get caught up, but at the end of the day, I do my best work when I slow down, when I actually take the time to reflect on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And how we support each other is also the same. It's not all, like you mentioned, it's not this generalized approach. It's the person, the individual. What would be something that will be helpful and or not helpful? In regards to that, I'm kind of posing this question. I'll ask you this question first and I'll answer it too. In regards to post-traumatic stress, what have you witnessed or experienced that has helped those struggling and their families? I know these are just, I could only share from my own experience, and maybe you could share from your experience. Obviously, everyone's situation be different, but it's just to encourage that each solution may need a level of creativity to find where that healing is. So go ahead. What do you think what have you experienced or witnessed that has helped you with the struggle?
Well, first of all, I appreciate what you said just about, there's many options. There's many different approaches, and different things are going to work for different people. And I think that's important. Mm-hmm. And I think, when someone's struggling, there's always this desire for immediate relief, which is totally understandable. Mm-hmm. And I would first want to say to anyone, you might need to try a couple or even a few different things before you really find what is going to be right for you. Stay with it. I can almost guarantee something's going to help, but we might not know what it is right away. So that's the first thing I want to acknowledge. And then just getting more specifically, I will plug what I do here. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I do work with people a lot who have experienced trauma, and very specifically, there's a hypnotherapy protocol that I work with that was used extensively in World War I, World War II. It kind of fell to the wayside as the pharmaceutical model of treatment kind of became a lot more prevalent, but this hypnotherapy protocol is extremely effective for a lot of people. So that's, any hypnotherapy I think can be helpful to an extent, but it's this protocol that I really highly recommend. So that's the way that I work with people who are, struggling in these ways. Other things, I don't do this myself, but I've seen people be helped with MDMA therapy a lot. And, and something that I think is really important and helpful, supportive to most people, although also only goes so far, is just simply talking with someone who is a good listener. And in a sense, I don't think that usually takes people right to the bottom of it. But I think it's so supportive and so helpful, at least as a starting point to just be able to share and be heard.
Yeah, I love that you said that. A lot of times I kind of go with the model, obviously working in the mental health field, is you treat the person, then you treat what they're going through. You don't, the element is that we keep forgetting is the person loses their dignity a bit, when they're going through this stuff. So dignity can be a huge barrier if it's not being addressed. The person doesn't feel heard, like you said. People might have a million great ideas to help the person, but if they feel unappreciated, if they feel not heard, if they feel all this stuff, and the family, and this is just from my own experience, if the family, they could have the best intentions, but if the person's not bought into it, if the person doesn't feel heard, if he doesn't feel like he has any human dignity, he's gonna feel less willing, not because of stubborn, just because he himself is not part of the process. And the fact of the matter is, if you're not part of the process, even if it works for a while, it may not be that thing that will actually help. A lot of times the question I ask, we do great sometimes, and not, obviously a long road to go with mental health, but in crisis, you go to hospital, stabilization, whatever. After that, after treatment, you may see if you do management, or if you go, hypnotherapy, whatever will work, you go. But at the same time, the question that always gets asked after a while is, what's next? Obviously, and that question is gray and can be ominous. But if the person's hurt and there's some sort of, if you humanize that they're human, we forget that we're human. It can play a bigger role in the willingness and the person's willingness to try new things, and their value may go up because they're part of the process as opposed to sidelining it. So that, at least that's my experience of what helps people struggling. And those people are family, doctors are not good doctors to themselves. Let me just say, nurses are not good nurses to themselves. Family members, you're too close to it. You have to be honest of that that portion. And that's why a third party, a person outside of that circle is going to be more effective at seeing something that you're not seeing as a family member. It's just
Absolutely.
It's a rule of thumb. Anything you want to add or piggyback or share till I go to the next part?
Very much agree with all of that, Robert. And the one I would say in a small number of cases, there are people who have talked and talked and talked and talked, and not seen anything change. So there is an occasional person who is just the talking. They're done with it. They're past it. And so just also want to acknowledge that there are people. There are some people, some situations where talking just is no longer the right thing. And there are other kinds of support as well.
Yeah. And, and unfortunately in those cases, they could just be in the system way too long.
In general, yes, that's where we have that situation. Absolutely. Yeah.
So the other thing I want to go to is the silent pain. Obviously, I use this as last year, the same month, and I thought it was just something so, I don't know, it just spoke to me when it comes to PTSD. And I just want to hear what you think, what the silent pain means regarding PTSD Awareness Month, and anything else you want to share.
Well, I think so often there's so much shame that can come with trauma. Shame about what happened, shame about how someone might have responded to it, and often even shame about how they're struggling with it and what might be happening because they're struggling with it. And I think that shame is what can lead to this experience of, the not sharing about it, the silence. And I think, and perhaps also there can be, after a lot of trauma, almost a feeling of separation from the world, so that there's this, the world is silent about the struggles, and the world almost seems silent, with everyone else going and doing their thing while the person is caught in their struggles.
Yeah. I think of, I kind of think the worst problems are the ones we don't know are problems.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, just like what you're describing, it's like the degree of apathy seeds in, and the problem with apathy is the symptom is you don't know you have a problem. You're just like, yeah, this is just, and unfortunately the problem stays there. The trauma stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. Right. And I think that's where the danger is, when you don't know there's a problem, even if it's a small problem. If it continues to kind of grow and grow. And that's that's where the silent it becomes, I guess, a little more dangerous in that regard. There's one quote I want to mention. We mentioned the militaries. I think this quote really speaks to me. During the period I was in the military, 2000, 2004. So during 9/11 and all that stuff, I was in the U.S. Air Force. But this spoke to me. It was from Jake Wood. He says, "I feel no emotional connection to the outward human gestures. I am not there because I never left Afghanistan." So it's that disassociation. It's that I'm not here. I'm just going through, and we're great actors, and in the sense of when we're feeling this way, we don't feel anyone's really bought into what we're going through. And one thing I've noticed, especially, is that people have told me it's exhausting trying to get people to understand what they're going through, and they just give up.
Right.
And the honest truth sometimes is that no one will. Let's try to find something that may be able to help. But sometimes, if they feel that silence and they feel like there's nothing there, it can be. This quote kind of haunts me a little bit because it very directly kind of illustrates what we're kind of talking about, what we hope doesn't happen for those who are struggling.
Absolutely. I find that quote heart-wrenching.
Yeah. So as we, I want to, pause a moment and just, every time I have a new guest or even a returning guest, I like to give an opportunity. You mentioned a little bit what you do, but I want to give you more of some time to kind of share with those who are listening, those who don't know you, a little bit what you do and what brought you to doing what you're doing, and anything that may be helpful that you want to add to this conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. So I mentioned in general, my encounters with violence as an adolescent. And, I went into an early part of adulthood, in a sense, not fully appreciating or realizing how much I had been affected by that. And yet, experienced a lot of struggles, which in retrospect, I see were the results of carrying that trauma. And I've kind of been, over many years was on a healing journey myself. So I've gone through that. And for about the last decade, I've been, working with other people in a variety of ways. And a lot to do with dealing with different impacts of trauma that people have experienced. And what I primarily do at this point, as I mentioned, is hypnotherapy. That's what I found that is, I'm going to say, one of the deepest ways that I found of really kind of getting to some of the core of the trauma that people have, that they carry, and finally releasing that so that the past can be healed and people can thrive in their lives moving forward, which is what I'm really passionate about and care about. And I wrote a book specifically on male violence and the cycles of that and the patterns of that we have in our society. And in that book, I share a lot more of the specifics of my own encounters with violence. And I see that as an invitation to people to shine light on what they might be hiding in the shadows in shame or fear or anger, and to really do the healing work. And it's my let's say one of my missions, my main mission, that I really want to prevent male-on-male violence in particular, because I see that as being a problem that underlies so many other problems. It's, it's certainly men are who commit most of the violence in the world against everybody. And although certainly not all males who experience violence against them go on to become violent themselves, I believe that it's very rare for a male to be violent who has not, first of all, experienced trauma himself, such that I see healing trauma, preventing trauma, as being something that just has the potential of spreading and making a more peaceful world for everyone.
I really appreciate just what you're doing, and those who are listening, those who are watching, if you want to know more about the book, it'll be in the notes. Anything else, you can just go and find it if you read down. And when I think about violence, like you said earlier, it's so normalized. How we approach it. In some ways, it's cheered and envied. And the idea of this is human history. How we were back in the how you say when we used to have in Rome, when they had the gladiators fight and all this stuff, the mob effect. And at the same time. The problem is that we're looking at such a far distance. We don't see what happens in the close vicinity when someone makes a horrible decision. I work in the mental health field, but a lot of times I'm in courts too, and I kind of see that side of it. And people make a rash decision, and then they have legal pending for assault or battery, or you name the gambit. And a lot of times I hear it's like, he's a nice guy. He's always and when there's a character, people trying to share, he's usually very, and that split second kind of reaction,
Right.
that can be life altering, because a person who, I work hard, I do all this stuff, and all of a sudden, it just gets overwhelming, and they don't know what outlets, I can't show emotion because, there's this one coin saying, I don't think it says. It doesn't finish the sentence. It's kind of we shouldn't be led by our emotions, right? Yeah, that makes sense. However, there's a caveat. We shouldn't ignore them either. We shouldn't ignore our emotions. We shouldn't be led to our emotions, because if we led by our emotions, we'll end up in trouble a lot of times. Our emotions can be sporadic, but there's also a responsibility of taking ownership of our emotions. Finding if for instance, I used this example recently because I thought it was kind of interesting. Let's say I was mad at you, Brad, and I realized that I was wrong about why I should be mad at you. But it was disproportional how angry I was at you for this sad thing. It'll be easy for us to normalize it and be like, it's good thing it didn't happen, whatever. But I encourage those who are listening to ask yourself, why did I get so mad? And start from there. Why was this such a pivotal moment that I got so mad at you? And it didn't happen, but don't let the emotion go. A lot of times I feel in society, when they hear the quote, when they hear the saying, "Oh, don't be led by emotions," period, it just ends there. But the emotions is just, if you understand what emotions are, it's part of you. It's something that's happening internally, and if we're not taking note of that, it can be a missed opportunity to learn something about yourself at the very least. So.
Definitely. And while I certainly can agree with the wisdom of not to be led by your emotions, if that's not understood correctly, I actually think it can be dangerous too, just as you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it's not the full thought. I'm sure it's not. It doesn't. And we're in a society that likes the cliff notes of how to do things. It can be interpreted in a way, and then of course there's also confirmation bias. If we're really struggling and we don't want to struggle, if we have an attitude or an idea that we don't want to be sick, we'll make it sure that this is not something that is reflective of me. I'm just stressed. I had a hard day at work. We will confirm everything to confirm that our biases are right. Yeah. So there's that too. I want to also mention, a lot of times there's a few quotes that I think kind of regarding those who are suffering with PTSD and their families. This is from Sun Wayne Raj. It says, "Not the person refusing to let go of the past, but the past refusing to let go of the person." This is someone experiencing something, how it may feel when someone is struggling with trauma. It's like people are like, why don't you just let that go? It's not that easy, Let me just say that. And one thing I like is this. It's from Unknown. I kind of represents the just being present. You don't have to save me. You just need to hold my hand while I save myself. Just show up. Just be there. A lot of times, we tend to normalize things that may be negative, but then part of what in this podcast and I try to do is, I was been a leader in churches and stuff like that, but the thing that I always feel is people just throw it under the rug. This is like an opportunity to know that, let's just speak plainly, mental health is inconvenient. PTSD is inconvenient. If we're going to kind of talk about it, we're not going to talk about like, well, X, Y, Z and try to find ways to reason. It is an illness just like any other illness. It's how we treat those who are suffering that, these awareness months are really about. It's not like we're going to find a cure from these things that will never have it or never be, because they're kind of part of us, but we're trying to find ways to navigate through them. It doesn't have to define who we are. As we wrap up, and it's been great to have you, what would you want those listening today remember regarding those struggling with PTSD and their family and this month? Anything you want to add or share that you want those who are listening as we wrap up this episode?
Above all, reach out. There's help for you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as I alluded to earlier, it may take some persistence to find the right help for you, but be persistent. Please be persistent and find the support that will help you. And it can get better.
Yeah.
It can get better for, no matter how difficult it is right now, no matter how difficult it seems, even if it seems hopeless, it can get better. I've witnessed it many times, and it can for you too.
I appreciate you, Brad. I also just want to side note and just say to those listening, don't assume those your friends. A lot of times I think about Robin Williams when I think about this concept. The happiest person, the life of the party, check on them. Just check on them. The thing is, a lot of times those friends that are always busting the jokes, they're all like they're doing so great. You don't know. I would like as a support, as being a friend, being a family member, a spouse, whatever. Don't assume that people know that they're appreciated. I know this is kind of a little coin thing, but I know people who are exceptional in music, play piano, and they tell me they don't know that people know that, like, they don't feel appreciated. So I would recommend, just as a little encouragement to those out there, this is just a rule of thumb I feel that may be helpful. We have all the ways to communicate, but we don't do it well. So I would encourage those. Don't assume your friend knows that they're good at anything. Just tell them one day, hey, I really appreciate this or that. Be a little bit kinder. Some people are like, oh, I don't have any time to volunteer. Well, if you go to a restaurant and they get it wrong, be kind to the waiter or the waitress. It is a hard job, to be a waiter or a server. And, those little things can make a big difference. People have told me, I was at wit's end and then someone just was kind to me. So I guess my final thought is really just be kind, not only to those around you, but to yourself, your family. This will take the time it takes. When you learn that you're valued and you are valued, that's internal, not just because he needs external. It becomes a little bit, at least what I find from my experience, it doesn't solve the problem, but it just makes it a little bit better in the sense that you feel that you're heard, and not everyone's going to understand, but that's okay because you're working it slowly but slowly. And thank you, Brad, for coming on it so much.
Thank you, Robert. Be kind. I love it. Beautiful.
And remember to stay updated with Revive Ministry through various platforms, reviveministry.com. Leave me this last quote. That changes it up. It was from Brené Brown. It says, "What we do not need in the midst of struggles is shame for being human." So let's be kind.